Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Outsourcing Data Services, the Business Case for Change. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You may have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the telephone, just select phone call in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to participate in the polls and submit questions to today's presenters by joining using www.slido.com and enter the passcode ADSP. Slido is a dynamic polling and Q&A software which is really simple to join. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of the sessions of the webinar. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our moderators today, Ben Stanley, Director of Helios, and Alex Bristol, Chief Executive Officer for SkyGuide and the Canso Champion for ATM Data Service Providers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, and good afternoon, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us, and many thanks for making the time for what promises to be a fascinating discussion. As Helen's just said, my name is Ben Stanley. I'm a director with Helios, one of the Aegis companies. I've had the pleasure of working with many of you over the last 20 years, and more recently, discussing this topic of ATM data service providers. Particularly from the perspective of the DG Move study on ADSPs, just awaiting publication at the moment, but also as one of the leads of Eurocai's new working group exploring the standardization of virtual centers and ADSPs, Working Group 122. I'm going to hand over to my co-chair Alex in a minute, but it's worth setting some context as we come to this discussion and the reason for this webinar. There are a lot of discussions on ADSPs at the moment. Most people on this call will be fairly familiar with the airspace architecture study's perspective on the creation of a common data layer across Europe and the possibility of creating separate providers to provide that data to air traffic service providers. There are several high-level benefits that the AAS considers, including cost efficiency possibilities to multiple centers or ATSUs, the potential resilience and the contingency, the more efficient capacity provision, and a model which encourages flexibility and scalability, potentially healthy competition, and thus innovation. These are all identified from a network perspective, a wide perspective. What is that perspective from a local level? What considerations need to be taken into account? And are we even in a place to consider outsourcing data services yet? Aegis and Canso have teamed up to host two webinars on this topic. The first one looks at the air navigation service provider perspective, and that's what you're in now. Why would you outsource, particularly when you as air navigation service providers have control over resources and services right now? And if you did identify compelling reasons, how do you make that case? How do you begin the change? What does that look like? We have planned a second webinar in the new year also, aimed at states and national supervisory authorities, including defence. States have responsibilities and obligations to provide air traffic services, and therefore they have an interest in how those services are conducted, and obviously how they might be outsourced. With responsibility becomes potential liability. And we want to explore some of those questions at that second webinar, hopefully in the new year. So without further delay, considering that local perspective, that air navigation service perspective, let me hand over to Alex to inform us, to challenge us. Alex, I'm getting some background noise, but are you able to hear me?
I can hear you, Ben. I'm hoping you can hear me as well. We had a couple of technical issues here in Switzerland, but knockout, excellent. Welcome from my side to everybody as well, and it's good to be here to have this conversation today. Just before I start, one of the things we realized when we were coming up to this is that when said quickly, ADSP and ATSP sound incredibly similar. So we're going to be try quite hard on our way through today to define whether we're talking about the Delta or the Tango version of these two topics. The whole idea about outsourcing things is almost anathema to an air navigation service provider, because of course we are by definition monopolies. We therefore do stuff ourselves, and that's what we've done for 70, 80 years. And inevitably, therefore, when we come up with, we're confronted with something like the airspace architecture study and say, okay, how do we get to that? How do we actually make that become reality? One of the first things we're bound to be faced with are fears of change in general, I suppose. But then there are fears that come after that, fears about, well, is my job at risk if I'm no longer going to produce that from within this company? Or is this organization at risk, in fact? Will we still exist in that future? Then there are other questions like, is this even possible? Is it safe? Is it secure? All of these elements they're reasonable and they're legitimate questions, but they're things that we need to move our way through, find answers to, and also help people move their way through. So it's a big change management thing. It's also going to be a big mindset change required, because if an ANSP no longer owns its own assets, and it's always defined itself by the ownership of those assets, whether they be CNS or whether they're flight data processors or whatever, then what are we going forward? And I think these are fundamental questions which I'm hoping that we're going to hear some good and interesting insights into during the next hour and a half or so, as we lead our way through to virtualization and to the fact that sourcing is possible. If I'm going to source, who am I going to source to? How do I make sure that still is safe? And indeed, can anybody else do that as well as I can? Really? All of these kind of things that are going on, the conversations that are happening, and of course supply management and management of contractors becomes a completely different game to managing everything yourself. Ben's already talked about the opportunities available out there, and one of the things that just want to sort of land with people as we head on into the first panel is that I remember back in 2010, 2011, when Skyguide was talking about Virtual Center, and a lot of other people thought we were crazy. Don't make any comment about whether that's true or not, but I would actually like to say that we now have a number of our critical safety systems on the service-orientated architecture. So we have got to the stage of starting to virtualize air traffic management itself. It is therefore possible. So is the management and the control of aircraft outside one's own space that's delineated by a geographical frontier. Skyguide's been doing that for many, many years, especially with the French. So all of these things are possible as far as I'm concerned, but they're very, very difficult. And it's some of those elements there that I'm really looking forward to hearing other people's ideas and thoughts about. Ben, over to you for the first session.
Thank you very much, Alex. So recognizing the challenges, but also the opportunities in front of us, we've got a wonderful lineup of speakers, really exciting, and thank you to all of them for joining us. We have a first session where we will be looking at an ANSP perspective on the kinds of decisions that need to be made as we approach outsourcing and outsourcing data services in particular. We'll then move on later on to a second session where we look at how you might create an ATM data service providers, how you'd oversee that, and what kind of process and building blocks for change we need to be looking at. You'll see on the slide there, many of these names very familiar to us in the discussion and in the industry. We'll be starting off session one with Guillaume Ramonet from DSNA, the co-flight program director. Moving on to Maurizio Romano, on behalf of ENAV, leads the Cesar project, looking at the operational delegation of services, particularly looking at cross-border, but particularly in a virtualization sense, a virtual center sense. And then finally, we have a presentation from Jarek Niewiński, the head of innovation at Panzer, as we look at beyond just an en route service provision, what opportunities lie in the tower and near tower environment, along with the other services there. Later on, Maya Marciniak from Helios will be sharing some of the building blocks, and then we'll hear from Michael van Dorst, the CEO of LVNL, the Dutch air navigation service provider, looking at how we get from this place moving forwards into the future. So without further delay, let me hand over to Guillaume to introduce DSNA's perspective on how you might make the case for change. Guillaume.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I will give you some perspective from DSNA, but acting as a ATM data service provider prototype, just to give you the flower of questions that we raised during our study with the CoFlight cloud service approach. Maybe next slide. Yeah. So just to make a short introduction with the agenda, we are going to explain what is CCS itself, and after that I will give you some perspective on the legal aspect, but also the safety ones, environmental benefit of doing this kind of ATM data service provision. Cyber security, that is obviously quite important in when we are talking about outsourcing. The social topic, that is also a key point, and also the technology and the modularity of ADSP. And I will finish with custom review. So we see we are going to cover a large scope of topic, but we could come back to them in the Q&A session for further details. And next slide. Next one. Okay, so what is CCS? So CCS is an industrial remote flight data processing services. It is based on the CoFlight product, CoFlight 4D trajectory system. CoFlight cloud service is SWIM compliant and is fully aligned with the CESAR specification. We keep the industrial project aligned with CESAR development. CCS is operated by two ANSP, the French one DSNA and the Italian one ENAV, for the benefit of the Swiss ANSP. The project has already delivered its first service contract with SkyGuide. So that means that we are already experimenting the service level agreement on all the agreement needed between an ADSP and ATM data service provider and the customer since last July. And we expect to be fully operational by 2025. So we have quite a long track to do before the full operational usage. Next. From the legal ground, what we have learned so far is that we need to involve the states at the early stage. The main point behind that is the sovereignty. It is important to tackle this point of the sovereignty topic at the beginning. What we have seen is that agreement between two states is not needed due to the European framework, but it could ease the legal ground for the other agreement when we are talking about NSA and other topic. It could be useful to have this kind of agreement between the two states. Of course, the military views need also to be embarked at the early stage of the project of outsourcing, because there need to be tackled also not only the civil needs. And the last one that maybe today it is not enough mature at European level. It is a data governance and data management framework. It is a must-have that we have discovered during the project. So it is maybe an area where we need to further work and to have a better framework for that. Next one. So now just to talk about safety. We are lucky with the FABEC because there is already a national supervisory authority framework between all the NSA of the FABEC, and so that it is an enabler to secure the common framework for the safety studies. Because what we have seen here also, it is even if we have a global framework, devil is in details, and when you look to the means of compliance, you could have differences between different NSP or different NSA, and so it is useful also to have this discussion at a methodology level and the means of compliance to be sure to understand each other. Maybe something that is it is more difficult to tackle or need more time. It is a safety regulation. For the time being, has been sought for systems and not for services. So there is clearly a need for adaptation of the regulation to think to have the mindset of services instead of system. What we have seen also, it is easier for ANSP to become an ATM data service provider, because we have seen that a lot of the regulation, the process inside the ANSP is already in place and useful for becoming or to provide a service level agreement in the framework of an ATM data service provider. So that is maybe for newcomers something to also to tackle at early stage to be sure that they have all the process around quality and so on. Next one, when we talk about environmental benefit, what we have seen, it is it needs maybe some investment to move the technology, but the benefit is you could use the latest hardware that they are more environmental friendly than the ones that are maybe 10 or 20 years in our NSP today. Of course, the most obvious one is the reduction of data centers across Europe, and also to develop a usage based on the volume of traffic. To be able to lower the number of servers needed, like in the COVID, unfortunately, the crisis of COVID-19. It could be something where we could reduce the usage of the server resources. What we have seen also, it is when we move to the cloud technology, it is very important to implement the FinOps concept, to have a financial approach related to the cloud, due to the fact you move from CapEx to OpEx, but also because it is very easy to create new servers, a new image, and so on. And if you don't master this aspect of your cloud, it could be more costly than the current system. So it is important also to have that at an early stage. Regarding the cyber security, could move to the next one. For the cyber security, where there is a need of a redundancy to tackle this cyber aspect. It is why we selected to have two countries to use ENAV, Italian and French one, in order to be able to have different data centers, and also to tackle some sovereignty points related to that, not to have too many dependents from one state. Of course, the need of a security operational center with a team well trained for reaction to cyber threat. So it is something that we are already started to implement. And the challenges around those topics are around the common framework. It is less mature than the safety one at the European level. Maybe the best approach is to use the ISO 9001. That is a good starting point, even if it is high level. It is a common language between the cybersecurity experts. And also the second challenge is around the national security agencies, where they are maybe sometimes reluctant to share the information related to cyber threat to other agency, and could use some national tag to avoid sharing the information. So that is something also to have them on board quite early in the process. Next one on the social topic. Yeah, for ADSP is based on outsourcing, so on concentration of a data center. But to do that, we need the knowledge of those who will be outsourced, and it is something that need to be addressed also. How to transfer the knowledge from the ANSP to the ATM data service provider in order to fulfill the need of the ANSP. Also, there is some change around the organization. There need to be a review the organization to think about SLA instead of systems. So it is a change of mindset on the organization, the way the organization behave. And also, it is a very important part of the change management process is the training of the technical people to master these new technologies that are behind the cloud approach and the outsourcing. So it is a big effort also to move that. Okay, so let's move to the technology part. Something that is difficult is the harmonization process at European level take quite a long time. If we have a look to the SWIM standard, it is around now 10 years old. And when we are talking about cloud, it is a very, how to say, a quick change technology. And it is sometimes difficult to select the right technology to accommodate the European harmonization and the best technology for cloud technology. There is also a challenge about how to split the granularity of the ATM system. For us, it is quite easy because FDP, flight data processing, is a major system in any ATM system, and it is behave quite the same between the different systems. But the closer you are going to the HMI from the controller, the more difficult it will be to outsource, to have common base for ADSP. And the last one is also something that is not widely implemented in the ATM system. It is a technology of microservices, but that is something that need better master in the coming years to get the most of the benefit of this ADSP ATM data service provision. Just one word to finish the presentation about the cost and revenue, just to give you how we have built it for CoreFlight cloud services approach. So next one. So we need regarding the cost to think about the social transition, and also the investment in the technology. That is an important part of the business case. The CCS business model is based on the sharing of the cost of the system between the NSP with NAV, DSNA, and SkyGuide. We have the same system, so we are able to share the evolution and so on. And also, we are able to make one single compliance to the European context for safety, security, or any implementing rules related to the FDP. So that is also somewhere some savings in terms of human resource and effort to make the compliance with the European regulation. So that is the two pillar of our revenue model. It is a sharing of the cost on the ATM FDP and also about the compliance. So thank you for that, and I am of course ready to answer any question at the end of the session.
Merci, Guillaume, and thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Really interesting. As Guillaume mentioned, please do log on to slido.com and ask your questions. There's plenty of people who are doing that, and you're able to upvote each other's questions as well. It's a very interactive platform. The passcode is ADSP, Alpha Delta Sierra Papa. So without further ado, we're going to move on to Maurizio Romano from ENAV, who is going to take us through some of the factors influencing the discussions and development of the delegation of services. Maurizio, over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me, Ben? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, Maurizio, it's all good.
Okay, good, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Maurizio Romano, and I am an employee of ENAV Group TechnoSky, an ATM expert, and I'm involved in CESAR 2020 Wave 2, and this solution is part of CESAR 2020 Wave 2. It's called PJ10, Work Package 3 Delegation among Air Traffic Service Units. And it's not a new one because it's a predecessor of previous solutions that are talking in a virtual center and airspace delegation context. Next slide, please. So as I told to you, this solution is a part of PJ10 managed by the FN inside CESAR work activities, and it is an operational one in order to test some use case in a different way on the delegation of air traffic services units, and it is targeted at the operational level as V3 level, with several use cases that has been identified by different NSP in order to test the lower complexity to the medium and high complexity in a different traffic condition. First, it has been identified by the previous activities in CESAR, especially from 1603, the different architectures that are used in the context of virtual center and how the decomposition of services are distributed in a geographical way. And based on this technical assumption and a set of validation that has been done with this architecture, we identified different use cases, starting with the simple one, medium, and complexity in order to use different DSP as the civil military cooperation, ATCFM, or particular new topics that should be happening with the dynamic airspace configuration concept. So as you can see in these graphs, we have the lower layer, how the technical services should be changed among the ATM data services provider. And we are in exactly the blue one, that this delegation of the airspace that before and then the data should be exchanged among the air traffic service units. Once we identify this use case, operational needs, the process, roles and responsibility, and working method, there are in the top level of these services and the air traffic controller licensing aspect that is not a part of the solution, but is a way to complete the exactly process defining the airspace architecture study and as well in the ACMA master plan. Next slide, please. Okay, as you can see, the dilemma, in order to test different exercise and different validation, we can start the situation as it is between the H1 and air traffic service 2 and how these should be exchanged the data without no particular differences, considering the actual working method, roles and responsibility that may occur during the delegation process. The dilemma is to have one DSP, two DSP, three DSP in a different way, because this solution, a part of the exchange of the data, aims to explain also some contingency procedures in a different way, in a failure attack, cybersecurity system, or outsourcing of the data when the air traffic controller should be a fire of the building of the systems. And based on these procedures, we have on the top level, the delegating and the receiving supervisor, and it aims to the sequence that should have necessarily some chronological and order in order to coordination between the top level of the supervisor and the information getting from the delegating and receiving air traffic air traffic controllers. There are some contingency use case. We should have a lot of contingent. We identified some contingency use case for the degraded mode emergency service continuity, operational recovery, and part of that are described also in this working method, according to the existing roles and responsibility of the air traffic controllers. Next slide, please. Okay, how was the history so far? This is just an important message, an important geographical distribution that was tested in the previous SAR activities. As you can see in this cylinder, in a green one, they represent a different NESP and how they are connected, representing this geographical distribution. And on the blue part are they are to investigate the different air traffic service units on the scenario identification, operational phase, and the actual process of this delegation should be done. This is a part of the FIR of Milano Space that takes over as an example of Geneva Space, and you can do also in a vice versa way, depending on the user case and the elements that you aims to delegate. We can start identified on this taxonomy of this use case. The first one, that is delegation of provision ATS services in night and low traffic condition. So it's important to start with simple traffic, simple scenario, and we have the next validation exercise that aims to involve DFS that represented the German airspace and Sky Guide with the different contingency in Spain and in Southampton as well. So we start with this use case, and there are some operational procedures on this use case, and there are also some technical infrastructure and a virtual center environment. Then other potential validation that are in solution 9.3 is delegation of provision at fixed time. So what about the behavior of the system if you have considered a normal peak of the traffic or complex scenario, if we have to investigate much more sector with different DSP or air traffic service units. Then we should have some complex DSP like the ATCFM provision. So air traffic service units 1 to air traffic service units 1 to based on the provision by the ATCFM regulation. We are thinking about some level cap to avoid some delay during the delegation procedures. This is quite important. That should be coming next validation by next year. As well, together with civil military cooperation, because consider this interoperability with civil military should be interesting also by digital information that these two operational and general air traffic may exchange during the delegation process. An important one where also CCS, as Liam said, ENAV is also part of CCS activities between cross-border operation. That is the situation on the granularity of the services that may be able to manage also some cross-border on the flight distribution level. And in a transversal to that one, in some of these use cases, we are testing contingency at space in a virtual center. So considering that one services should be falling down and we have a business continuity of these services. Our business case in this part is important to identify the cost for the direct and the direct and indirect cost, and to maintain the business continuity at the same level. Next slide, please. Our assumptions are started from the operational scenario at baseline level that we can consider the ADSP side as a standalone, as a reference scenario. So the current infrastructure, current layer, and the solution scenario where the different architecture should be possible with a single or multiple DSP. This should be a good benefit of the cost-benefit analysis that we are investigating of our point of contact in order to see this cost, and this business case should be implemented during the delegation of the services. Next slide, please. One infrastructure one point that is really important on the infrastructure layer, on the build cost center implementation as the business case. This is an operational solution called delegation of services. But if you can consider from NSP perspective that you can use 3 different layers about the actual systems we call informally legacy 1, that you have the current infrastructure, current enablers, current architecture, that you may implement some elements in a virtualization environment, and this is part of the NSP choice. But the innovative and the future one should be with the DSP side, that you can use an architecture with a service-oriented architecture or remote DSP with some appropriate interface or owner interface that you can define in some technical specification and the architecture framework. You can manage your delegation and your services up to your architecture. So many partners and many NSP may implement this space delegation in a different way. We have virtual center with services. We have multiple specialized redundant DSP, standard or non-standard interface, and with the possibility to have some different wrappers, gateway or interoperability between the different vendors. Next slide, please. Starting on the current infrastructure and aligned with the space architecture study, there should be some evolution of the legacy system between new systems. Based on the previous things that I said to you before, on this new system should be compared with the actual situation as it is the implementation scenario that is not fully networked with the legacy system, closed standards, no wrapper interoperability, or not fully compliant with virtual center systems. The part of the intermediate version, and the implementation scenario should be close to the mixed legacy system, a part of the wrapper interface that you can implement by own yourself. And the future scenario is a part of the network with open standards and fully interoperable with virtual center systems. Next slide, please. A part of these 2 identified of business use case on the operational and technical layer, we have some indicator and key performance area that the old solution is investigated by the training. These new working method and roles responsibility offers new training for the asset part, because based on the service that you can identify, you should invest some cost on the human resource and the flexibility of the human also for the technical staff to be implemented according to this new roles and responsibility. Operational and administrative procedures are related on these procedures, regulation, licensing, to put in place also in this implementation and these features. Technological costs, in order to implement this new system, you have to implement some costs also on the technological layer. And part of the things of the procedures that the solution is sent to investigate is a licensing, not fully compliant because this solution is just a delegation of ATS. Licensing is something on the top level that in wave 3 there are some projects that are investigated on these topics. Benefits in terms of air traffic controller productivity, technological cost, air traffic capacity, especially during the delegation context, operational efficiency, predictability, flexibility, and resilience. So as you can see, there are some data and some indicator that the solution is aimed to investigate by qualitative and quantitative analysis. Next slide, please. This is just an initial cost-benefit analysis that we are investigating with the partners, because due to the amount of the partners and the NSP also involved, there are some direct and indirect costs on the assumption that all the stakeholders are involved in this solution are compared with the benefit and the assessment of the validation target on the solution by the transversal activity by 19.4 that they are evaluated. We are discussing on this evaluation of the cost by the infrastructure or the DSP or the cost of the air traffic controller during the delegation context. with some methodology and some tools that the experts of this deliverable are investigating. Next slide. Okay, this is just a particular slide with the list of benefits that they are talking in a different way. There are some long-term investment on this future interoperable reference architecture technology, and this is fully aligned with the space architecture study because it should be implemented new services according to delegation of services in the operational and technical way. There are some transversal projects like EJ32 in Wave 3, like ATCFM regulation and civil military that are part of that are compliant with the ADSP part in order to be implemented and to have a plug-in application in order to be ready also for the standardization. Parallel activities are also mentioned in the EuroCai Working Group 1 to 2 in a virtual center environment. New feature on the operational way by the dynamic, elastic, optimized, on-demand, geographical distribution, and staff allocation in this slide, and resiliency of the systems with some implementation of local services in order to guarantee an acceptable level of the quality of services, and to reduce on the human side, the human interaction from the human safety point of view, and the seamless operation at the same level of the performance and where the controller should be applied in a normal way. Next slide. As you can see, this is a big partnership by the industry, the NSP perspective, technical agency. A lot of partners are inside this solution, and we have a lot of validation in order to demonstrate this delegation of services in a different way at V3 level, with with a lot of several use case and as well business case are promising. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maurizio. To anyone furiously scribbling notes with the information that's being imparted here, and there's some really good stuff, I believe that the recording will be made available afterwards as well. So please don't worry that you might have missed something. For those who haven't yet gone to slido.com and typed in the password ADSP, Alpha Delta Sierra Papa, please do so. There's lots of questions being asked there, and we'll try and address them in the Q&A in a moment and at the end of session 2. So without further ado, our final speaker in this first session is Jarek Niewiński, the head of innovation from Panzer, with a slightly different perspective now, moving from the en route environment and towards the environment around the airport. Jarek, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you very much to all the attendees. So at Panzer, we see also that different perspective is already growing in the CSAR 2020, but not only. As we all remember, CSAR 1 was fully focused on the upper airspace and made a significant number of advancements to this upper airspace, which allows at this stage to make a smoother transition from the fragmented environment to the one that is much more integrated, to allowing us the capability to introduce data service provision also as outsourcing. Please, next slide. Airports are usually the first frontier. The airports are considered from the different perspective because they usually process much more data, much more different stakeholders than the airspace, the upper airspace. Usual flight data number is expanded and even tripling the amount of data processed for individual flight. But we have to remember that also the growing drone revolution, the growing new traffic around the airports, and of course freedom of flight that is observed will make it even much harder to process and will expand this amount of data even further. Therefore, we need to focus on the relevance and security of the data because they will become in the future network management functions. We need to understand that currently majority of the network management area is being covered by the data, but of course with no the same amount of data as we normally proceed with. And what's most important, these data are not usually covering smaller airports. They are quite invisible to the system, which make the predictable traffic management a little bit harder. Next slide, please. The key for growth, as we consider this, is built around those four major areas. First of all, services. As I mentioned already, the data enable the integration of drone revolution that goes beyond current ATS. I believe that within a few years, we will face something like drone ports. We can imagine really big number of additional traffic in the airports, around the airport zones, and not only around the communication airports, this one that were already designed well for commercial traffic, but also around airports that are smaller, that are regional, or even the aero clubs, and it will become a nightmare for everyone because this data needs to be managed. This data needs to be managed for a single reason. The airspace has to be managed, and the predictability of the airspace, both controlled and uncontrolled, will be very important to improve the dynamicity. This dynamicity is already well acknowledged and recognized by the network manager. As we see the trends here, we believe that we need to make or to build a new ideas about the dynamic airspace management that will, for example, make the different airspace classes much more available to the traffic, or on the other hand, the dynamic borders, both vertical and horizontal, will be based on the data from airspace use, so we could really perform better. Why so? Because we believe that the airport and tower related data must consider all airports to achieve performance. We need to start working from fragmented system, and it was already covered by a couple of my slides of my predecessors. We need to consider the performance in the long run to integrate all type of traffics, all type that are already recognized or not recognized, because the drones will change everything a lot, and especially the airports will be affected, and the airports will become a key for growth because they need to manage both types of traffic, both manned and unmanned traffic in the future. So it all becomes very important, especially when considering the safety. We need, as we are designed to, as we are forced to, and it's our duty, we need to make the traffic safe. The safety is also not considered from the perspective of the traffic, air traffic safety, but also from the cybersecurity point of view. And it's a really big challenge to those that are working as the future ADSP, to make the data integration, to make the data transmission safe, because opposite to the upper airspace, opposite to the existing access, the airport data are coming from many different sources. So this challenge is growing and is becoming even more important in the nearest future. Next slide, please. From the perspective of the airport, the local and network data will be something very big. This integration and provision for future outsourcing is important because it will drive a change in market segments, also non-aviation. Of course, we are becoming more and more familiar with the concepts like smart cities, like public services for drones, for taxis, and so on. And we believe that managing of the aeronautical data, air data, flight data, integration of this data will become a milestone for and the foundation for future dynamic traffic management, but also for future dynamic public services. We are already well used to traffic numbers, the traffic volume that is coming throughout our streets. We see them also in the predictive mode or the replay mode in the Google Maps. But why we can't do it in predictive mode with use of the data from airports, from drones, and see, for example, which lane will be much more convenient for us to manage to get in time for the airports. This is something that will be enabled and well managed through integration of the data and through allowing those data works in the new segments for both future or existing traffic systems. We also need to consider that perspective in both civil and military way. It's not only a matter of making the services more accessible and fancy, innovative, but also to bring the public security. We are believing that in the long run, in the future, the traffic, especially the unmanned traffic or the small traffic in the vicinity of the airports, will grow that much that we need to handle, for example, the air taxis that will be either manned or unmanned, and they will pose additional threats, additional problems. So the exchange of the data protection, as well as the integration of this data, will become even more important for public security, for public services. That the service, something that is already well growing. Next slide, please. And as we go through, we are asking a few questions if we are really ready for this. Few of those things were already touched briefly from the perspective of the upper airspace, but we see it from the different perspective from the airport and tower data, because first of all, and the most important, we need to talk about the data ownership. The current approach, who acquires that owns, must either require structured approach at the ICAO or European Commission level, because at this stage it's being not regulated well, and it will cause problems. Those problems, of course, will create a little bit lower data market at the first stage, because data will be as expensive as we value them. But on the other hand, if we are unsure about the ownership, this data will not be available to create this market value that I was touching in my previous slides. We also need to understand that some antitrust consideration must be given for value, because there will be already, or there are already existing companies that are using data pretty much, and the new set of data, aviation data, will become for them very important. So to disallow them to make the trust, we need to really have a deeper view on this area and really start studying this part, considering all the work that has been done so far in both CSAR, but also in the independent studies by different ANSPs or companies. And of course, which I touched a little bit already, the security must come with all of these specific topics. A common approach to cybersecurity shall aim at reduction of vulnerability to attacks. Some of those areas were already well touched by the data provision concept, by SWIM concept, by the cybersecurity aspects, but we also need to understand that the independent data infrastructure, that is the investment, that is the hard infrastructure, will need to be built to secure the capability to exchange the data, to feed the different stakeholders with the information that is secured and accessible. And at the last, we need to also consider the persistent and consistent data delivery. This data delivery is crucial for setting a safe data market, as we already observe some data disturbancy, some source disturbancy, and if we really need to create it on the low level, we need to make sure that those data are available, that the ownership problems or the security problems are at least solved or discussed, because otherwise we won't be able to go so much into this new area and to cover it well at the airport level. I feel that from the perspective of airports, the situation is a little bit different, also for the reason that the different stakeholders have different interests. And of course, we need to combine the performance with the cost effectiveness, because while we have pretty good amount of data coming from the different sources, but from the bigger airports that are already richer, more eager to invest, those smaller airports will become in the longer period the most important ones, and we will need to bring some light on this area, as the solutions that we create for them must be really cost effective. I hope that I brought a little bit of light how the airports systems, how the fragmentation that we need to deal with is being handled in order to achieve a little bit more consistent data-based, object-based concept for data service provision. Thank you.
Jarek, thank you very much, and hopefully everyone has benefited from both the questions but also some of the prompts that have been given from our speakers. I see many of you are asking questions on Slido. We're going to do a quick poll, a live poll now. If you are on Slido, you should be able to see the poll open. You're allowed 2 answers, so choose your 2 priorities. What are the main drivers for you as an ANSP to outsource data services? What are the main drivers for you as an ANSP to outsource data services? Maybe based on what you've heard on your internal discussions. We've put down there a number of different areas. So we'll leave that maybe for 30 seconds or so for people to have a read through and answer. In the meantime, I will be joined by the rest of the panelists and Alex as we move into a Q&A time. So we're seeing from a few respondents a focus at the moment on the cost efficiency through economies of scale. So the idea that an outsourced provider can provide a service to multiple parties and therefore in theory cost less per party. We're seeing resilience being an important part of that, and contingency.
Contingency and resilience, of course, Ben, are quite closely related as well. So there's a little bit of overlap between those 2, I reckon.
Mm-hmm. It's good to see innovation scoring highly. I think there's real interest around what a service-oriented approach can do with the introduction of a new organization and way of introducing service providers and services within that. Super. Thank you very much, everyone. Do carry on, and if there's any change to those results, we'll let you know. But in the meantime, we're going to bring up the questions that you've been asking on Slido and try to facilitate a fairly rapid-fire discussion as we go through. Alex, do you want to take this first one, maybe?
Well, actually, so I can help out there, even though Guillaume knows the answer to this just as well as I do. The FTP is absolutely only a part of the system, and there is a lot of other inputs, of course, in that. For us, CWP remains a core part of the thing that we would do locally. Absolutely, yes, but we are looking within SkyGuide to outsource as much of the other stuff that we can. That makes sense.
Guillaume?
Yeah, maybe to complement what Alex just said, it is we're talking about economy of scale. So we need to have the components around the ATM system that are shared and common between the different ANSP. And the closer we are from HMI, the more customization for each ANSP we have. So it is important to have this modularity in the ATM system in order to have the bigger IDSP and to get the economy of scale on that. And the FDP, of course, is one of the main elements of an ATM system.
Yes, and it's fair to say other industries have wrestled with this as well. The notion of platform versus infrastructure versus an end service, a plug and play, has long been around in the digital industries. The Eurokai group looking at performance-based standardization of this area is absolutely looking at this issue and sort of saying, well, do we need to create a single solution, or actually could we have multiple service-oriented approaches for different customer pairings, depending on what's necessary. So it really is a live debate, I think.
And that's closely linked to another question that's asked as well about whether the Italian, the French, and the Swiss systems are all the same or similar. And Guillaume, I think the answer to that is that the Italian and the French ones are relatively similar, but the Swiss one is different and depends on a standard that we can use.
Yeah, for the French and Italian one, it is the same high-level specification. But behind that, we have two industry. On the French side, for flight is Thales. On the Italian side, it is Leonardo. So that means at a lower level, there is some differences in the implementation of the high-level specification.
It's a good test. Let's take Jean-Marc's question next, and Guillaume, you can tell him off if you didn't want someone from DSNA asking you the question. Do you foresee the need to involve the state for sovereignty issues for each type of data, or could one general involvement be sufficient? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I could answer on this one. In fact, the state related to the data is not the main point behind outsourcing. The main point is about really sovereignty and dependency against another country. Due to the importance of the economic activity of NSP, it is important also that we have the buy-in of the state to outsource any part of the system. So it is really linked to the sovereignty, not only to each data that is linked to secret or protection on things like that.
Perhaps a comment on that through discussions we had during partly during the DG Move study and partly during others. I think we need to unpack what we mean when we say sovereignty issues. I think as you mentioned there, the obligations of the member state, the responsibilities that it needs to put in place will mean that some form of oversight of approval of what we call an ATSP designation would be a good step to take for significant outsourcing. The question is then, how granular does that need to be? So in other words, could we put in place a framework within which the state is able to express the requirements, particularly for cross-border outsourcing, and then allow for the organizations, the ATSPs, the air traffic service providers, to move forwards within that framework? I think the maximum flexibility we can create would probably be good in this kind of circumstance. Any other comments on that from anyone else?
I can give a concrete example with Switzerland, certainly, that the Swiss government is very interested in keeping an eye on this. We've got an agreement in principle that we can have data going elsewhere to be processed, and that is the basis of the Co-Flight Cloud Service deal that Guillaume was talking about. But because we're an integrated service provider, the military is also one of our customers. The military is very, very interested in having some kind of a separation created so that the military sovereign data can be kept separate from the civil flight data. But I think Ben's point there, you've got to look at each case quite specifically rather than trying to answer it all at too high a level. I think that's correct.
Mm-hmm. I like the next slightly provocative question. So in a different working session, and it might have been the DG Move workshop, around 85% of the ANSPs were claiming to want to be an ATM data service provider. So where's the gain? Do we think that's true? Any views on that?
Okay. For me, the answer to that is specialization. If we want to gain collectively the match, we need to specialize on each component, like FDP, maybe RDPS for other ADSP, and to have the sharing of economy of scale among us. Otherwise, it will not work for sure.
Mm-hmm. As well, from my side, I think that the this granularity of the services should be an added value with respect of the actual system and the actual implementation. So it's not that the service as it is and should be interoperable with everybody. But I think that a specialized mode on the list of the operation of each services should be gain a lot of value from the NSP. It depends on the NSP perspective that should be specialized on the civil, military, or ATCFM or things like that. It depends on the business that the NSP should be done in this context. Huh?
It's an interesting question because I think if we rephrased it as ANSPs, air navigation service providers, want to have control over an ATM data service provision, that I think we could absolutely agree with. The question is whether that's done through outsourcing and service level agreements, whether it's done through joint ventures if there's ownership control. I think there's a lot of options there besides purely transferring a function into a new entity.
I think that's right. I mean, speaking as one of the 15% that believes that we're going to become an ATSP, a Tango, it doesn't necessarily exclude the fact that there may be some data that we still want to provide for whatever reason. But back to Guillaume's point, it would be because we're specialized in it and because we're the only ones or the best ones to be able to provide that on a case-by-case business case. And I think that's then the key element. But if everybody in Europe, if every ANSP believes it should be an ADSP, then we're not going very far.
Indeed. I see a comment there from Fernando from INER, and I think it's a comment and a question. I mean, it's a true comment that data ownership, liabilities, and royalties should be considered in any future market. Any comment on that? Jarek, you mentioned it in the context of your presentation. Any comment that you'd want to make as to how to do that, even?
The major case from our perspective is actually how the ownership would be managed also in the European level, because at this stage we have various providers and everyone believes it's their own data unless it comes to a selling point. I don't really know how to solve it best, because even considering a single flight, so there is an owner coming from as an aircraft operator, there's another owner which is avionics operator, that is another owner that is the frame operator, and then you have a receiving party. So everyone receives ADSB data, in those cases on a radar data, you have 4 owners. And this is something we need to really dig very deeply in order to understand the implications from the different owners and the different producers of the data and the integrators of the data. And it is something that I believe should be given a bigger attention in the nearest future. Also on the European level, maybe a study that actually tackles it by CSAR would be something that is something I would normally propose to do as the first thing.
There are some thoughts in the eagerly awaited DG Move study that's soon to be published. So I would encourage you to have a look at that and then maybe respond back, because certainly for data ownership, the SES framework and operational data within that and the Open Data Directive both need to be held and understood as we move towards this. Alex, I think I'll hand over to you to lead us through session 2, and then we'll come back to some Q&A again afterwards. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Very good. Thank you all very much indeed. And no doubt we'll pick up 1 or 2 more points as we move on our way through. So that was the piece about what is it about and why would we move in this direction at all? And now we move towards sort of the pragmatic reality of actually how do we become an ADSP or an ATSP, because as we just heard, simply everyone becoming an ADSP doesn't make the situation any better. For that, we got 2 great panelists, and come on straight to the first one, who was briefly introduced earlier on by Ben, Maja Marciniak, who is a senior consultant at Helios, been there for just over 5 years, and who specializes in data and information analysis. especially with modeling, business models, market and performance assessments, and business cases, so on. I think you're in a very good position, Maya, to give us a quick insight into this area of the ATM data service providers.
Excellent, perfect. Thank you so much, Alex, for the kind introduction, and good afternoon to you all. Thank you for joining us and engaging in the discussion. As we know, the topic of ATM data service provision has been around for a while, but I do think the discussions are now accelerating. And as we've already seen earlier today, there is a range of views, both from perspectives of a lot of benefits that are possible, but also we've already touched on a number of concerns that remain. So today what I want to talk to you about is how do we prepare for this change and how do we make it a reality. So moving to the next slide, I would like to reflect on what we've learned so far today. The first point is that we have already seen evidence that ATM data service provision can bring benefits to a variety of stakeholders and in a range of operational environments. This is not only en route, we've seen already a discussion around tower services, and a varied operational case can be made for it. Secondly, we have seen that from a technical point of view, we can already be moving to ATM data service provision. But what we've also seen is that it's not easy. It requires a lot of technical interface work, and actually when an existing air navigation service provider chooses an ATM data service provider, it's really difficult to then switch supplier, resulting in a lock-in. So it's possible, but we don't yet have a competitive market, which is really what we're hoping for. The third point stemming out from this is that challenges still remain. We've already heard some mentions of concerns around resilience, the staff impact, liability implications, and they're all valid concerns, but they're all concerns that can be managed and should be managed proactively. And then finally, the final point is that it may be quite easy to jump to a conclusion that actually a lot of the elements that are outstanding are outside of our control, should be tackled by member states, by the European Commission. But the point I'm trying to make today is that on an organizational level of existing air navigation service providers, there's a lot that can be done to prepare for this change and to also help drive this change in a direction that is then helpful to the operating environment of each individual air navigation service provider. So moving to the building blocks. What are they? The first consideration around building blocks is the fact that they can be seen on all sorts of levels. They can be helpful to guide the discussion at an EU level, at a state level, and within the organizational level, which is the focus I am making today. And the first building block is the block of certification. And definitely certifying will fall as a responsibility on the member states and potentially EASA or maybe another EU institution. But actually existing air navigation service providers can help shape the framework for the certification now. We should start asking ourselves questions: what are the biggest concerns that we have around data service provision, and what kind of measures would we like to see in the certification framework to really ensure that when this change comes around, we have the confidence that every ATM data service provider that offers their services, we can rely on sourcing the information from them. The second building block that I would like to talk about is the topic of standards. And as we've already seen today, ATM data service provision is absolutely possible. We've seen examples already, but without standards, we end up in this lock-in situation. It's really difficult to change supplier, as there's a lot of technical work that has to happen at the system interface. So if we really want to create a competitive market, and I believe this is the direction we should be going into, we should make sure that air traffic service providers can switch between data service providers. And we've already seen in the industry discussions about standardization. For example, Ben mentioned the EUROCAI Working Group 1 to 2 at the very beginning. And discussions around standardization are happening, and I encourage everyone to get engaged. We need to make sure that the standards framework that is put in place meets the objectives of a range of players in this industry. We need to make sure that the services are sufficiently service-oriented. And in doing this, we need to have a discussion around what are we really trying to achieve and how much standardization is required. We need standards to enable this change, but we also don't want to overburden the system with standards that just really constrain us in the future. Moving to the third building block, which is the topic of liability. And of course, the concerns around liability are observed across all levels of the organization and beyond. Definitely management will be concerned about liability, air traffic controllers will be concerned about liability, them being the people who on a day-to-day basis use and rely on the data. States will obviously be concerned about liability. And it is really important to make sure that there's clarity. There has to be clarity in regards to the arrangements with the potential data supplier on where the responsibilities lie, who holds what liability, how is this liability mitigated, for example, through insurance provision. And then these conversations and these arrangements have to be flown across the organization so that everyone is aware and that there's really confidence building through this open communication and through showing across all levels of the organization that these risks are being recognized, they're being mitigated proactively, and making sure that through this, ultimately the air traffic controllers will be confident in using the data. On the topic of ensuring stakeholder buy-in, we have the fourth building block, which relates to the feasibility demonstrations. And feasibility demonstration is a great way of building stakeholder buy-in. It allows to really demonstrate both the benefits, but also the way of operating. And engaging staff in feasibility demonstrations is a way of allowing them to see the benefits, see the considerations, see all the safeguards, but also allows them to then also raise questions, and potentially steer the development of the solution and the end operational arrangement. So it's really bringing together experience and ensuring there's empirical evidence backing the ultimate change in the organization. The fifth building block is the topic of competence and training. It has to be recognized that there will be a change on staff, but this change will be really dependent on the individual organizational level, on the operating environment, on whether an organization will just become an air traffic service provider, completely sourcing the data from a different organization, or potentially two companies that are quite closely linked together. So there's a lot of considerations and local level differences that need to be taken into account. But it is really important to make sure that a detailed local assessment is taken into account, taking into consideration these local arrangements. And competence and training has to be proactively managed, and it has to include an appreciation of the end-to-end data chain for the entire air traffic services to really understand what are the changes that will happen, and how will that impact then the role of individuals in the organization. And then this really closely links to the final building block, which is the topic of continuously managed change. And it is really important that change is managed continuously and proactively throughout the entire process, from idea generation all the way through to implementation and beyond. And we really need to create this understanding of creating a best model for our organization given the goals of this organization. And this change has to be communicated, and it has to take into account all the social and human impacts that have to be, again, proactively and continuously managed. And ultimately, the final point I would like to make is, and Helen, you can click once again, is that there is this entire change process will have to be underpinned by strong leadership. And what we need is a strong leadership with a clear vision. And of course, there's still a number of unknowns, but there is enough lessons learned and enough discussions to really start forming this clear vision and then start mapping this vision against organizational objectives. And then we end up with a clarity of a vision linking into an objective, which then links into actions which underpin this change. And that way, the change can really be successful. Thank you. And Alex, back to you.
Thanks very much, Maya. So there we have some building blocks that we can think about and use on our way. And we'll move straight on, coming back for questions later on. On the topic of questions, there's a bit of a slowdown in the number of questions coming in over Slido. So if you do have a question for the panelists, please do remember to get onto Slido and put the question down there for us to answer a bit later on. The next speaker is Michiel van Dorst. He is the CEO of LVNL from Holland. And he's also the vice chairman of the CANSO European CEOs platform. He's also the FABEC HR champion, which may become relevant in a couple of questions later on as well. And he has, but we still talk to him, he has got a background with the airlines. Michiel, over to you.
Thank you, Alex, for the opportunity to talk here, and also thank you to Ben and the people from Aegis company. So the question today is, of course, on challenges and opportunities for the DSP challenge we have so far in the CES2 Plus team. So first, to understand why outsourcing of data service has become a theme in Europe, we have to look at where we stand today. And that's what my first slide, the next slide, is about, actually, is the fact that we are on an evolutionary trajectory. Yes, thank you. So we see the evolution in airport and airline evolution, but we also see an evolution on the supply side. And I think what we still see is that as ANSPs, we are some kind jack of all trades. All the things we are doing nowadays would normally, in a lot of competitive markets, it would probably be done by several companies. Next slide, please. I'll skip a bit of the first slide, Alex, so we can make some speed giving a look at the time. If you look at the next slide, of course, at the moment we are struggling with the threat of stagnation. And stagnation is actually driven by three phenomena. And I think those phenomena are felt by airlines and ANSPs at the same time, and also actually by passengers. For ANSPs, it's increasingly difficult to develop services, and it requires more and more investments, even to make small changes. The most important reason is that the current operational concept has been optimized to a point that little can be gained except by changing the concept itself, and that is by starting a new S-curve. And that actually implies an introduction of new technology that supports a new operational concept. But as services have developed conventionally by means of splitting airspace sectors and adding working positions, operational staff has grown, and so have operational costs. And reversal of this trend has proven to be very difficult against the backdrop of very much increasing demand, which is different than the last 9 months now, by the way. However, we have had some successes during these times. Remote tower solutions show great potential to deliver a superior services at a lower cost. But the rise of network delays, I think, is the most clear signal that the pace of innovation is not keeping up with demand. And we have had some large-scale changes over the last few years, but the last few have been already a few years ago. Now on to the next slide, please. It's not so that Europe has had a standstill to start to develop innovating. We've had big ambitious developments set in motion to anticipate traffic growth and the advent of new airspace users. And some of these developments have been more useful than others, and without them, some of the innovations we see today would not have emerged. However, none of them has been the big game changer as we need in ATM. The separation of data services provision from air traffic service provision is seen as an enabler for next level of system integration and a catalyst for innovation. The separation of data services may be seen as an accelerator that can drive the transition towards a new ATM paradigm. However, the separation itself is also a paradigm shift, not for ATM, but for the way we do business in ATM. So next slide, please. From an ANSP point of view, there are two sides to data outsourcing. It means letting go of something you are good at, and it means that you have to take on a new role and engage in something new. And I think we as ANSPs are very good at what we do. We develop and maintain systems. I sometimes say to my people, we are a low-speed booking.com. We are a tech organization with air traffic controllers. And we show that by having developed and upgraded our system while maintaining the system and operational stability over the last 60 or 70 or 80 years. And we have tailored our system to very high performance. We are very good, I think, at what we do. But at the same time, we may need to follow the path of, for instance, the healthcare industry. Hospitals are also very good at what they do, but at least in the Netherlands, what we see, many of them have been able to specialize and trim their product lines to become excellent in certain fields of expertise at a reduced cost. Because what is good for today may not be good for tomorrow. Next slide, please. The outsourcing of data services does not mean that the ANSP has no role in management of data anymore. There is still a role, but the role changes and the focus changes. For one, outsourcing of data services means that staff roles change. It is not that ANSPs are new to data sharing and data-driven innovation, but there is plenty of room for growth. Data-driven innovation is an exciting development with many spectacular examples where it has brought progress. It has brought breakthroughs in DNA research and even brought new insights, as I mentioned on the right side of the slide, in archaeology. Air traffic services could likewise benefit from data-driven innovation. The link to data service provision in this respect is a logical one. ANSP simply cannot afford to expand their staff to perform this type of innovation. And the logical step is to see collaboration, and data service provision can be instrumental to that. The opportunities, as you can see on the next slide, are abundant. New opportunities may present themselves. From the ATSP point of view, service provision can be much more tailored to the needs of the airspace users, supported by modular systems. Could be compared to a LEGO system, where different building blocks supporting different services can be offered by the ADSP. And also can provide a next level of interoperability that the current system has not been able to provide. Of course, we have to be cautious also, because I think a market of full competition will not develop. And we have to be mindful that system monopolies without regulation tend to dampen innovation and drive up cost. The biggest opportunity, I think, for data services outsourcing is that it could accelerate the innovation pace and broaden the innovation scope, opening up the innovations from other industries. And this is clearly an opportunity that is difficult to access when ANSPs try to develop data-driven innovation through in-house developments. Now, this may all seem very nice and a friendly view of a better world for all, or is it? Because I think Alex and I think also Maya just mentioned some worries about this introduction, and it comes on the next slide. An important point, I think, is to consider is what outsourcings mean for local ambitions in relation to the optimization of the European network. If data service provision would fully consolidate in Europe, what would it mean for local ambitions of airports or countries that do not belong to the top airports? Will they be served, or will innovation go where the money is? And the question, of course, is will they all have equal access to the European network? The other thing, and it was mentioned before as well, is I think when Alex spoke about the Swiss, is that national security and defense requirements will require provisions when outsourcing data services but can also limit the selection of providers, because outsourcing of data services may come along with entanglements that prove to be problematic in case of political tensions. We have recently seen some examples of this in the US-China and EU-China relationships. Entanglements may also be problematic in case of mergers and acquisitions. An ANSP may have a trustworthy data service provider, but may find itself caught amid political tensions after its data service provider has been taken over. And this especially will be the case when the acquisition creates a dependency with a country that is considered to be more or less hostile or non-friendly. An ATSP may focus on its core business, but government-appointed responsibilities remain for the ANSPs, and it includes data provision. Outsourcing of data service requirement requires management and provisions to ensure that ATSPs can fulfill these responsibilities. A close cooperation, finally, between the users of the system, the controllers and the engineers who specify and build the system has proven to be successful in ATM innovation, and this should be retained. So I think what is needed in this market where a lot of opportunities arise, and I think it's happened in the energy market as well as in the telecom market, we should really have a deep look into this. There are many opportunities for the ANSPs and for finally the passengers over Europe, but we also need to have a close watch and investigate via study or a consequence study to really understand the effect of all the ambitions in Europe. Thank you very much, Alex and Ben.
Thank you, Michiel. And with that, we see opportunities and challenges. And I think you gave an answer on the way through as well to one of the questions that was asked in respect of which other industries we can learn from over here with your answer about looking at the energy sectors and the telecoms who have gone through a similar experience as well. Ben, you got a question for us on Slido, or should we?
I think so. We'll ask a quick poll if we may. And so a free text answer this time. Do be honest. What is the main question outstanding for you? If you are considering becoming an ATM data service provider, what's the key question you've got? And we'll take a look at those as they come in and maybe decide whether or not to pick them up in the Q&A. So if you just go across to polls and type in your answer, we'll have a look at those. And in the meantime, we'll have a look at the main Q&A. Alex, I think the first question is yours.
I'll pick up the first one, and then certainly there are a couple that were specifically for Maya as well. So the very first one is about Skyguide. Are we planning to decouple our CNS and transfer them to an external provider? So the intention is to decouple the CNS from within Skyguide. In other words, at the moment, it is a core part of our business and has been since Skyguide, since any ANSP has been created, really. Our intention is to say this becomes a potential ancillary service. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Skyguide would not then do CNS, but it needs to be done on the basis that our CNS is more efficient, more productive, or better value than somebody else that we may go and see. And this has the benefit of focusing us more closely on our vision, on our strategy for the future, but also on driving some behaviors that think about customer and business value within the company as well. And that's actually quite a beneficial effect. So that for that one. There was a question in there as well about surely if there's going to be a market competition for ADSPs, aren't we going to see all the same things happening as we saw with the GSM market, and an over-proliferation of services or an over-proliferation of infrastructure as well? What do we think the answer to that might be? Maya, I'll start with you and then go to Michiel.
Well, I think what we're really looking for is a competitive market that does create a reduction in costs effectively. I think with regards to a proliferation of sensors in a country, I think it's something that we already see with regards to the existing CNS infrastructure not being particularly efficient. We have a lot of overlaps between states for sovereignty issues. So I think we have that anyway, but we're not being efficient. So I think ATM data service provision allows us to increase competitiveness, increase innovation, and actually make better use of the infrastructure that we have.
Thank you. And so I'm going to sort of ask the same question, but with a slightly different twist on it to Michiel as well. Is the correct way then of sorting ourselves out? Michiel, are you still with us? Sorry, I can't see you anymore.
Sure.
Good man. Is the correct way out of this to allow a full market to develop? In other words, is it purely market driven, or do you need some kind of regulation? Do you need some kind of centralization to keep it under control?
I think you really need some kind of centralization. I think you really have to look at some not only European policies on foreign trade, but also looking at some countries. I mean, security threats are different nowadays than 10 years ago. I think also the experience that people have with outsourcing of data services, etc., like telecom instances, people tend to understand nowadays that some are of primary importance for a country. I think the whole view in Europe and also in some countries has changed from total liberalization to a bit of guided liberalization, I would say. So I think a step should be made there towards guided liberalization, and it will probably also help in not having a proliferation of sensors in a country, but make sure that you do guide the market parties to come up with a solution that is feasible for the military as well as the local operations in Europe.
Thank you, Michiel. So a question also was asked by Peter Simonson, I think, which was on the building blocks themselves, Maya. So which building blocks do you think are in place, and which ones need more development? How do we go about dealing with that?
No, it's a good question. Thanks, Peter, for that. I think there's definitely some that are already en route, you could say. So I've mentioned 6, and I think we're definitely already talking about standardization. We are definitely, I would hope, managing change, and we definitely have feasibility demonstrations. So that is great. I think with regards to the discussions that I wouldn't really say are very mature from where I sit yet is predominantly the topic around certification. And I think that's because as ANSPs, we start feeling like it's not something that is within our remit of responsibility. So it becomes something that's left for others to deal with. So I think really starting to have discussions internally on what the concerns are and what specific concerns would have to be overcome through certification. I think that's probably a topic area that would be worth engaging in.
Thank you. And I'm looking, just going to look at the next one down on the screen there as well. Jarek, one for you there about the European Commission. Should they maybe not separate the en route services from the terminal services so that we can actually consider the airport as part of that network, as a node in the network, rather than something separate?
That actually brings 2 different perspectives, because if we consider from the first perspective, so who will buy the data, who will be the service receiving entity, then basically I would say that the real money lays down there in the airport and its vicinity. On the other hand, I still believe, and even considering the Michel's presentation, that there is a certain part of the data or certain part of the market that should still stay segregated and being targeting only the air traffic service providers. So normally I'd say that we shouldn't separate, because there will be the same set of data at the very beginning. But on the other hand, we need to separate the data themselves, the origin of the data sets, from the markets they will be delivered to.
I'm going to pick up 2 more questions now. One for Guillaume, and that's the one on the co-flight cloud services. You can see there from Ari Herwayer. What is the military view on the CCS specific, or just a standard in any case? I think that came from your presentation.
Yeah. In fact, it is clearly in my presentation, it was clearly linked to co-flight cloud services, because we are dealing with flight plan. And of course, we are talking about the military flight plan. So it is something that is sensitive for military to share this kind of data. But it is also from a general perspective to be sure that the outsourcing of some part of the information is agreed by them, also at least known by them. So as a customer, but also as a stakeholder.
And Michiel, you've got also a system which brings in the civil and the military. You mentioned that in yours as well. How does that work in respect of the ATM data service provision and the military side of the customer? Can you deal with them both the same, or do you have to differentiate?
Yeah, it is a good question, and I think one of the things you also faced in Switzerland. We are presently actually integrating the military into LVNL. We are co-located since 2 years now. In the next 2 years, we will use for a slow integration of the military services into LVNL. And of course, it has been done by the Dutch military also in MUAC. They have transferred some of their control to Maastricht Upper Air Control. But yes, we do see, given those discussions, we do see that they have different requirements on data provision. They have different requirements on data security, and not only in peacetime, right? But it's especially in times of tension and war that the demands become different, and we really have to make sure that as ANSPs we face those challenges and we provide them with the necessary requirements they have. So it is different for the military. I understand that. At the same time, it also depends on what your military is in for and the type of threats, I would say, in the world nowadays. But yes, it is different.
And a similar question to Maurizio then, the last one. Maurizio, for you then, we're talking about the delegation of services in your presentation. Do you see a differentiation there, civil and military as well?
Yeah, I will just interrupt you just to complement. Is quite differentiation, because in the context of virtual center and part of the DSP, civil military is one of potential use case that in SASAR they do not validate in the previous phase, and this is also the right opportunity to share the data about the operational air traffic and general air traffic and how is the behavior of the system in order to share this data in advance before you aim to delegate some things. In fact, I think this is my personal feeling that we share with the operational people before to delegate the delegation of the services. We have to assure that the system of the general air traffic and the operational are synchronized, and the way to sharing your data of one entities with respect of the other one.
Thank you, Maurizio. We're coming towards the end of the allotted time, but can see there's still quite a few people on. There are still quite a few questions left to answer, so we'll just keep going for about another 5 to 7 minutes and pick up another couple of questions whilst we have the opportunity and this panel present as well. And there's one question specifically for Maya as well, which was asked about the point that you mentioned ATSEPs but not ATCOs, and whether there should be an ATCO, there's an impact on ATCOs, yes or no, on that one.
Yes, well, I think it's, again, a very good question. Definitely, I think there will be an impact on ATCOs, but I don't think that impact will, I think there will be concerns about reliability of data and kind of making sure they can continue their job, but it's with regards to just pure outsourcing of data services, I wouldn't see an impact in terms of affecting the job as they have with regards to providing the service. So anything related to licensing or the specific operational environment they are within. I think if we move beyond the pure outsourcing of data, which again isn't really what we discussed today, but I think we all have at the back of our heads, so potentially moving to talking about capacity on demand and kind of providing services from different different centers, then I think definitely that's when the impacts on air traffic controllers will come, and there will be a lot of management and risk management and impact management. A lot of considerations will be required at that point. But I think with regards to just the pure data service outsourcing, I think core impact will be on the technical staff. It is their job will likely change the most.
There are two more questions that I'd like to pick up, and then I'll see if, Ben, you've got anything that's caught your eye particularly. One of them, of course, is this question, will we feel comfortable with the Chinese ADSP? But actually, whether it's China, whether it's not China, the question asked more generically is, do we believe this should be a market and a market-driven competition? Or do we believe that actually there should be restrictions and there must be restrictions? And now I'm assuming that part of that we're looking at some of the wrong people, because we should be looking at politicians to answer part of that question. But just as a general first response to that, Maya, I'm going to start with you, then I'll go to Maurizio.
Well, I would say if we want to revolutionize the industry, and if we're really looking for cost efficiency, and if we're really looking for an increased rate of innovation, I think we need to move towards the competitive market. But I think that still has to be done with all the kind of safety provisions that we have, and making sure that the frameworks that we put in place ensure that the continuity of the service, the resilience of the service, the sovereignty, all of these issues have to be kept in mind. We can't just throw all of that out the window and say, let's just compete. But I think there is potential to have a competitive market for the data services that will really create opportunities in the way the service for ATSPs, air traffic services, that is provided.
And so in the creation of the framework that you mentioned there, which would then create the limits of that market, is part of the answer, and presumably that's a similar position that you're taking there to Michiel's answer about the regulation, with a centralized element as well. Yes,
definitely.
Thank you. Maurizio, anything to add on that one?
No, it's just quite sensible on the China's part, because I think that there are some ongoing activities in order before to standardize the services at the top central level, and then gives the opportunity to open the market on the business, on the different business user case, and the way to choose on the NSP perspective how is the most deployable on the market and should be useful from their operational perspective.
Mm-hmm. And the last question I'm going to pick up is the one on the transition costs, because transitioning from a set of legacy systems to a service-orientated architecture does not come for free, and you have to invest on top of just a straight replacement in order to go to the service-orientated architecture, but with a view to the long-term making efficiency, productivity savings, and also enabling certain other elements. The question was pointed rather more, though, at the point that presumably you don't want to just go at it willy-nilly. You've got to choose the right moment in time to go there. Guillaume, I look at you there. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it is. We need clearly to take care of the new technology. It is easy, new technology. And when you have a look to that, and you could have quite quickly a higher cost, either for operation, because you have everybody in each center trying to make its own application and so on, where the added value is maybe not so evident. And also, you have a need for investment, because if we want to take the benefit of the new architecture like SOA, but even to go further with the microservice technology and so on, you need clearly to invest to renew system. So the question of transitioning, if you Do we make a big step to change completely the system, to build a new system based on the new architecture, making the 2030 architecture, if I say things like that? Or do we move from our current legacy system stepwise? For that, it is clearly part of the business case for each ANSP. But clearly, we need to take care about the cost associated to that.
Because otherwise you can end up with quite a lot of investment that doesn't get you anywhere. Good news is our business case for the virtual center in Skyguide anyway gives us a payback by 2028, so that's a good thing already. Actually very pleased with that. And one of the other answers to the questions on my way through as well is, yes, we can still place an A-man on top of what we've got because that's how the system has been constructed as well. So we do our best to make sure that we keep as many options open and as many possibilities to plug and play as possible. Ben, anything from
perhaps
you?
a comment on the last question. And it highlights the need for a vision. And it actually highlights the need for that vision to be communicated well to industry and to other players as well. For ANSPs, I think you guys need to know where you want to get to and ensure that you as the customers are pushing across several different stakeholders in order to move there. I think the risk is otherwise you have a fragmented transition available to you that doesn't meet your local context. In other words, you may say, well, I need to get A, then B, then C, but B may not be available because you hadn't anticipated 5 years ago. And that transition to a service-oriented architecture, to a service level agreement approach, actually, as opposed to a procurement of a system, how you get through that. There's some good lessons learned from others in the industry at the moment that are walking similar paths. And again, a little bit of a pitch for the Eurokai group. One of the things we're trying to do is gather those lessons learned from others around the world who are looking at that kind of service-oriented approach. Also from other industries. I mean, we talk about, I think there you go, other sectors that aviation can look to. Bayan, the banking industry, has been one that's come up time and again. Financial services obviously rely on critical data. If they didn't get it right, they would get a lot of complaints. And so how we learn the lessons from their service-oriented approach, their standardization approach, the way that they've enabled competition and innovation in that market, I think we would do well to pick up on that. Any other comments about other sectors? Michiel, are you still with us? Are you able to say anything about your initial thoughts on the energy sector, for example? Don't hear him. We might. No. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. A question that received a lot of upvotes was, is there a risk that insurance cost hampers ADSP business? It's something that comes up. So there's two aspects here. One is that the service level agreement is not met. There's a contractual issue that has impact on the end air traffic service and therefore the airlines, and whether or not an ADSP, particularly a private ADSP, but also a public one, would need to be gain insurance from that. There's also, of course, the risks around safety and security and the insurance costs there. Any of our panelists want to comment on that who may have talked to insurance brokers as part of the process they've gone through? I guess Guillaume, Alex, Maurizio, Jarek, anything to say in that?
Yeah, maybe to comment on that. The first one is why I say it is easier for ANSP to become an ATM data service provider, because they have already this kind of approach for their own business. So that is something that could help. But it is also why we come to two data centers, one in France and the other one in Italy, in order to be able to deal with the contingency plan and all those risks that has been highlighted by the lawyers at the feasibility study level.
Very good. I think we, as part of the DG Move study, we talked to some of the insurance brokers and asked them the question. I think having a consistent certification and risk assessment approach will help here. Where there's uncertainty, risk might be priced in. And as much as we can remove uncertainty, if we are creating a Europe-wide market, I think that will help in terms of how that insurance cost is generated. The other thing to say is there is, of course, an insurance market here. And therefore, if we are able to incentivize that market to engage in this as early as possible, that will help. Alex, I don't know, I think we've slightly run out of time here as well. So anything else you wanted to pick up before we wrap up?
No, for me, that is good. For my part, I'll hand back to you, Ben, in 20 seconds time just to close out. But for my part, thank you to everyone who's joined us. Thank you to the excellent panelists. And I wish everybody a Merry Christmas, a happy and a very healthy New Year.
Indeed. And likewise, I'd echo Alex's words. Thank you so much to everyone who's engaged. I believe we have recorded this and we will be seeing how we make it available going forwards. If there are any questions, of course, do get in touch. But otherwise, thank you very much to all the participants, to our panelists, and let's hope we are flying again in the new year. Take care all. God bless and have a great Christmas. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Alex, and a big thank you to all the speakers today and for everyone attending today's webinar. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey, and we would appreciate if you complete that and provide your feedback. So on behalf of Helios and Canzo, thank you for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your day.